Well, they've changed it. It was Fan Days, but they've also seen it listed as Fan Festival. So whichever Fan Days Festival here in Dallas. I am your moderator, but you're not here for me. We're here for these fine folks. Who are you? Wait, go ahead, Claudia. Pose, look pretty.
Oh, thank you guys. You made my job so easy. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right. Hi, my name is Claudia Gray. I am the author of many books for young adults, including the Constellation Trilogy and the Firebird Trilogy. I get to come to events like this because I've also written novels and comics for Star Wars, and I've done a graphic novel trilogy for DC, the House of L series, and I also do a Jane Austen, Agatha Christie mashup mystery series.
My name is Jeremy Adams. I currently write a bunch of comic books, written on Supernatural and a bunch of animated movies for Warner Brothers. And that's it. That's all of interest.
Where on Supernatural? What did you write on Supernatural?
Scooby-Natural? The Scooby-Doo
Yeah.
crossover?
Yeah. That is some of the finest television ever.
Thank you. Yeah, me and my buddy did it, and it was like every step of the way we kept thinking they were going to stop us, and they never did. Even the notes calls were like, on page 32. That was really funny. And we're like, is there a note? And they're like, no, we just wanted to let you know it was funny. And we're like, oh,
Never had to say it's like no beheading and things like that.
It was very strange. It was one of the best writing experiences I've ever had. And then I went on staff the final season and did a couple of like wacky episodes. So yeah.
The final season got back into some of the groove that they. I think it was because they knew they were heading into the end.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, they hired me specifically. They said, we don't want you to do anything with the drama. We just want to hire you to do weird stuff. And I'm like, great. Here's a bunch of weird stuff. And they're like, that's too weird. Tone it back. Right. Let's do a Roadhouse episode with Christian Kane. And they're like, yeah, okay, great. So
you've each wound up working with other people's stories in addition to working on your own. Let's lead with the other people's stories, because that may be part, like you said, you get to be here because of Star Wars. We'll lead with those, then we'll go to your stuff.
All right.
So how do you wind up working with Star Wars or Supernatural? In these, how do you end up in those kind of positions? Obviously it takes a lot to be the kind of person who get the chance, but
Okay, mine. You'll understand why I'm beginning back this far as I tell it. All right, go back in time. It's 1995. I have a 2400 baud modem, which is slightly faster than chiseling cuneiform. And I have a disc that gives me 10 free hours of America Online. So I get on, and immediately I find people who are also talking about the X-Files and who are also aware that Mulder and Scully should kiss, which they kept on not doing. And many of us were moved to action. So I started writing fan fiction with that. And at first it was very bad fan fiction, and then it was sort of less bad, and then began to rise to mediocre, it was like, okay. And then I started writing fan fiction about other things, and it improved as we went. And then I had my first novel-length idea where I was like, oh, that's what 90,000 words that are one story with some subplots, that's what that kind of feels like. Okay, so from that time on, I thought, well, maybe I could do this. I really loved Buffy and Angel, so I wound up writing something about vampires and teenagers that through sheer stupid luck came to New York basically the week they were going, this thing called Twilight is silly. So in a lot of ways the book wasn't ready and I wasn't ready, but I got published, and then it's sort of been keeping up from there. And I've written a lot of paranormal, and I've written some science fiction, and on we go. And then finally there comes a day I'm at the gas station. I'm just about to pump. My agent calls and she's like, did you see that email? I'm like, what email? And she's like, the one that says Star Wars. I'm checking it at the thing. And they had, they wanted me for a book, and we thought that they had mistyped the wrong year on the deadline. No, they wanted it that quickly. But it all came together, and you're wondering like, oh, that means you like got your professional reputation out there, and then you got this job, and that is partly true. The other part is that the editor at Star Wars who brought me in is somebody I met on Alt TV X-Files creating. Although that wasn't just that she knew me, she also knew how I worked with the world and how I worked with characters, and that I could like replicate voices of characters and things. So like she'd seen how I handled other people's material, and that's how that happened.
Yeah, getting the voice right on somebody else's character is. You worry a lot about it, or you just happen to be the person who has the feel for those characters?
Both.
Yeah.
All the time.
I know for me, I mean, just if you're a professional writer and you've been doing it for a long time, it seems fairly easy, especially if you're well acquainted with whatever it is. You know, so it's like Sam and Dean, I've been watching the show since episode 1. So it's like, oh, I know what this is. I don't have to worry about it. And very similar to you, like as far as Supernatural, the reason we got the chance to do Scooby Natural was because the guy who ended up being the showrunner, when I was a producer's assistant, my cousin said, hey, I have this friend that lives in Utah that's been writing these spec scripts, you should read them. His name's Andrew Dabb. I was like, I'll read it. And then Andrew and I became friends, and then I remember when Andrew got on the show on the 4th season, I took him to Sizzler. I remember being like really jealous too. Oh my gosh, you're on Supernatural. And he just stayed until they finally said, you can have the show now. You know, so I had a relationship so I could call him and be like, hey, would you ever want to do this? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. But having those relationships is something that I'm not very good at in terms of networking. Neil Gaiman has this great commencement speech where he talks about you have to be 2 of these 3 things. And it's always like really good, great to work with, and on time. And I never know if I'm really good because I've had people hire me and go, oh, I hate the way you write dialogue, but I love the way you write action. And the next person will be like, I love the way that you write dialogue, and I hate the way that you write action. Like, it's all subjective, but I can be really nice, and I can be really collaborative and get things in on time, and those are the controllables. And that, for me, has always been the recipe to success is you're dealing with somebody else's toys, and as long as you're respectful with it, and get it in on time, then people go, oh, I can rely on this person. Because sometimes the upper people don't care what's going on, you know, they just want it done.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, part of it is the dialogue voice, but there's also the tone.
Yeah.
And I mean, a show can have a lot of different flavors, or you know, like Star Wars can have everything from Solo to Andor.
Right.
You know, Supernatural went all over the place, but there's still like, there's a flavor of it that you have to understand, and you can maybe bend it in certain directions if the story requires that, but you have to sense that. And one of the things that the editor brought me in said, she's like, sometimes the biggest fans can't do that.
Correct.
Because they're so in love with it that it's what they would say, what they would do in this area, and you have to be able to take a step back and see it.
Which is hard.
Yeah.
I wrote over 30 issues of The Flash, and that's been going on for ages, and now I'm doing Green Lantern. And so you're literally picking up where somebody else left off. And you're trying to make it so it's not so out of character that people will be turned off of it, but you also are trying to mine something that hasn't been done before so people are excited about it. And it's tricky.
Yeah, don't start off with your first cover saying, everything you've learned is wrong.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I don't know. No, just kidding.
Have you wound up having the chance to work on something that you didn't know as well, but decided you would give it a shot?
I mean, doesn't exactly apply, but there really is something about the very first comic I was ever hired to do was working in the world of Superman for DC. You know, and that's like being given a tricycle. It's like, now you're in the Tour de France.
Yeah.
You know. So that was a little daunting. And I did get to work, you know, on Krypton with the House of L. So I wasn't specifically having Superman, Lois Lane, etc., but getting to work in that world and coming up with your own space within it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's a little frightening. I knew it, but I didn't know this part of it, I guess. Or there are things, like I love Star Wars and always have, but there are things that I'm just not the kind of fan that knows every make of blaster.
Right.
There are plenty of people out there for whom that is awesome and great, and more power to them. It's not me. I'm like, story group, supply blaster model, you know, in brackets.
Yeah, when you're dealing with that kind of thing, like writers I've known, like we had a panel in San Diego this summer during the strike, so all the writers are creatively referring to the shows that they were working on. Fast Guy in Red, you know, it's the restrictions weren't as tight on them as on the actors. But they were saying like fans are the greatest source of things like that. They will be able to get you some of these informations. And then how there's this thing called Wikipedia, and you sometimes wonder, how did this writer not look that up?
Yeah. Well, it's hard too because you have editors and people that are supposed to help you with that. I've done a lot of Mortal Kombat animated movies. I had played the game, but beyond that, I didn't understand that it was incredibly expansive universe, and started going down that rabbit hole. And when you start going to like Mortal Kombat wikis and you're like hitting hyperlinks and you're like, this is insane. How can I do it to pass muster with the fans? Because you do want to make sure they know that you care enough to actually try, but it's hard when it's so expansive. I mean, Flash, I knew of the Flash, I grew up with the Flash, but I wasn't reading extensively. And so when they gave me the Flash, I was like, oh no. Like, how am I gonna read, 50 years of Flash in a week, So, you do your best and you try to figure out your voice with the character and ways around continuity or changing continuity.
I actually want to add this. It's a very slight tangent, but it's something that I always wondered about as a fan. A show would make a continuity error. I'd be like, how do they not know, etc. And then I began doing my original stuff, and I realized when you're creating something, you don't just remember the final product. You remember first draft, second draft, the notes in the second draft, that thing you thought about doing with Act 3 that you didn't go back and do. Like, you remember all the versions, and it can be tricky to remember what won out in the end.
Yes.
Like that, I think that's the cause of way more of those errors than.
Especially when it's not your toys.
Oh yeah.
And then as a writer, you're handing off, like in animation specifically, my job is to hand off a blueprint to the people that build the house. And those construction workers, those storyboard artists and directors, voice actors and all that, they build it up and they may change something and I'm just not privy to it. Like, that's not my job. I don't get to say in the final thing. So I might, my second Mortal Kombat movie, we cut out 40 minutes.
Wow.
And people are like, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, I get it. It's not on me, but it's hard because writers also get a lot of the praise and a lot of the criticism, so.
Within that context, how much of your own original character creation do you get to do in the context of working in somebody else's story? Obviously, you have to add minor characters, or especially when it's a Freak of the Week story. Most of the characters of the story will be original with something like Supernatural. How much freedom do you have in that regard?
I've been extraordinarily lucky because my first Star Wars novel, they wanted it to be about original characters. They wanted two childhood friends who share this bond that survives even though they wind up on opposite sides of the war in the original trilogy. And that went well enough that I've had a lot of liberty to come up with people since and have them be substantive characters in the story. Then of course came the High Republic, where we made up everybody except Yoda, which was really great. Or House of L. I mean, House of L came about primarily, I think, because somebody there had read Lost Stars. They wanted original characters on Krypton going, what are they not telling us about our planet? And Jor-El and Lara and Zod, they show up. But fundamentally, it's about these new people. And I think readers are very open to that, actually, if they don't feel like it's being forced on them, or if it's not done at the expense of an existing character, if that makes sense.
I also think that, like, if you're a company, it's only gravy. You're having somebody make characters that you will own and not them. So, like, she may, I imagine you don't have an ownership of any of the characters you make. So, same thing with me at DC, except DC does have an opportunity to own a sliver of characters if they've made a significant impact. But, when you have somebody like Paul Dini and Bruce Timm that do Harley Quinn, and they own a piece of that, but that was like one of the first times, and then it was like, we're not doing that again,
Had they been doing the animated series she debuted on?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that was a controversy in itself, but the fact is, I know that DC is very pleased if I make characters, mostly because also I'm not interfering with another book. I will make characters to fill it in order so that I can tell my story and I don't have to bother anybody else's plans. So like Joshua Williamson, I'll be texting like, hey, can I use this character? He's like, no, that person's in jail. And I'm like, but can I break him out for? No. And I'm like, okay, I gotta make a new character. Or in Supernatural, Mrs. Butters, I was always just like, oh man, I wanna do, you know, what would happen if I dream a genie and, you know, the Supernatural? And it was like, I can make a character, cool. And for those shows, like genre shows, it's really great, especially Star Trek or Star Wars, because it gives those actors life beyond. You know, like Todd Stashwick, you know, he's done a ton of stuff, but then he does Star Trek, and it's like, oh,
He's
now.
a captain in Picard.
Yeah.
The one
Yeah,
who
he's
you
fantastic.
kind of hate, but he's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So then it's like, oh, now that character has life and bones, and you can use them in many different ways.
Yeah, with Star Wars, and I'm gonna guess it's like this with other things too, it's a balance because, again, like you said, you want people that are new, both to people that world,
Right.
not to trip over other people, and also, you know, it should feel like a big galaxy out there,
Yes.
you know. But on the other hand, fans love connection.
Yeah.
They love finding that link. So you want to have just enough to make it feel like it's tied in and really kind of make people excited about that,
Yeah.
without it being like, you know, the only people staying at this hotel, or I don't know, like Mon Mothma and Boba Fett, you know, or whatever that would be. That would be a wacky hotel.
Well, and also, like, I know for me, I try to develop the new character in a way that'll make them memorable. I know people that will just go, here's 10 new characters in a book, and you're like, you will forget about all of them mostly. And so you giving them like enough, because there's only so much space on the page, giving a character enough to make him memorable is a task unto itself. But if you really want them to shine and people to enjoy them for years later, I love the idea of I get to play with somebody else's toys from a toy box, and then at the end of the day, I've added more toys, and so somebody else will be able to play with them later. So that's how I think about it.
Do you ever withhold ideas?
Yes.
Because somebody else will own them.
Yes.
Some
Yeah.
may be too personal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a couple times where I've done one. I did this intergalactic space wrestler issue, and the minute I sent it out, I was like, oh no, I screwed up. I shouldn't have given them that. But a lot of times for my own stuff, I'll save a lot of ideas and characters.
I don't know if that's been my experience, just because I've tried really hard. Like, I feel like most of what I've written in Star Wars could only be Star Wars.
Not your upcoming series, Galaxy War.
No, not my upcoming series, Galaxy War. Even the space opera, you know, it deals with artificial life in a way that's very different from droids, etc. And ideally, that's the way it works. But yeah, there are certain things where you're like, no. And you don't want to have like, because there have been a couple times where I've had an idea and it is very specific to Star Wars, but I'm like, why could I not have a similarly great idea in this other universe?
I think about it too. I try not to be stingy with my ideas because I do feel like I'm fortunate enough to have like a ton of ideas. There's more ideas now than I will be able to execute. So I try not to be stingy because the platform you get in writing one of the big two comics or working on a TV show with really good ideas will propel you further. It'll give you more power to do your own thing. So you try not to hold back, but there are some, for sure.
And and this applies as much or maybe even more to original work, like have faith in your ability to keep creating. I definitely see a lot of beginning writers, like they have 3 books planned out, but you get halfway into the first book before a big beat happens. It's like, no, go ahead, bring that beat. Like, pretty much everything you thought about this trilogy needs to be in this book. You'll think of more things if it comes to it. Like, trust yourself.
Totally. That happens in Hollywood all the time. It's like, well, and on season 5, it's like, bro, you're lucky if you get half a season. So you need to just throw it all out there and get people really excited about it. And just trust, like you said, that you can come up with a cliffhanger that will lead into
If you watch a movie that this is incomplete, and it's like they should throw the stuff into the first one if you ever want to make it better.
Yeah, the worst thing I've heard is like, well, he's setting it up for the next movie. It's like, you know, like that may not happen. It almost never happens.
Yeah, I mean, and the few instances where I can think of where it does really work, like we were talking yesterday about, is it Across the Spider-Verse?
Right, yeah. Yes.
You know, it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna need that third movie, but after what you just showed me, I will absolutely
Right.
be there. And it works because there's also a lot of meta about comics and the way Spider-Man's story goes, etc., that sets up an ending like that. You know, of course, that's part and parcel of this.
But they had the proof of concept by making a smash hit on the first one.
Yes.
And now it's like, well, we will definitely give you 2,
Yeah.
you know, if not more.
Yeah, or Empire Strikes Back. It's
Right.
like, you can cliffhang the heck out of that, you know. Star
Versus-
Wars was, I think, still in some theaters at that
I mean,
point.
it's like if you watch Matrix, you're like, this is a perfect single movie. Obviously, they came to you and said, can you do a sequel? And you say, well, yes, I have 2 other ideas. It's like, I don't think you did. I think you said the money looks great and I'll figure it out. But that first movie's just one complete movie. And they put it all out there.
Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although their 2 did fit together in a way that
Right.
made a lot more sense than The Matrix. But the first one is a complete story,
Yeah,
while
absolutely.
totally setting up
Yeah.
room for more adventure. But if there are no more, you feel good about the story that
Totally.
you've got.
Totally.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot for, I try to do all of my book series like that. The first book is a perfectly satisfying standalone. I make no promises about the second book.
Like, you're invested now.
Yeah.
Let's tell them about your original works, the stuff where you own your own characters. What do you do?
In the Jane Austen mystery series, I don't own a whole lot of them, but they're public domain,
Yes.
Lovely.
which is
You
great.
own your version of them. though.
I own those events and the original characters that I put into it. What would you? But that's not science fiction. I need to branch.
You talk about what you want.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the
we
stuff
like
that,
it all.
They're into it.
the stuff that I own, it usually goes into a script that you try to sell around town, and it's a terrible experience. But the advantage of starting to do comic books is there's a great amount of opportunity as a comic book writer to do your own creator-owned books. So the level of investment to make them is smaller than a movie. Plus, you have the added benefit of getting to own it all. So that's something that I'm exploring now, which is really fun because I've been out in LA since 1999 trying to break in. It took me over 10 years before I got credit on Green Lantern, the animated series. And then it was like, you're not sitting idle, you have tons of ideas. And now it's like, oh, I have a little bit of notoriety that I can actually make my own thing that people might purchase and allow me to keep making my own thing.
And one of the advantages of comics, you know, like you still, even when you write books in another universe, even if they go over really well, there are still people who, you know, maybe have a little bit of a boundary up, like they don't know what you're gonna be like with your
Right.
original stuff. Whereas in
Right.
comics, there's a very strong understanding that you work with other people's IP.
Right.
Like that, those are often the biggest games in town.
Right.
And so I think that the audience is much quicker to be like, oh yeah, I want to look at all of these things.
You do get a bit of a reputation, good or bad. I mean, whether it's internally to what you're doing or externally, but turning in things. I got called to do there's a Lego Jurassic Park retelling that I did, and it was like, hey, they knew me. I mean, it was like, oh, you're the call. And by the way, we're gonna put Spielberg in it as a minifig. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. But because they can trust you, and after a while you start to trust yourself, not very much, but enough to do the job. I don't know, learning to trust yourself as a creator is a really hard thing, especially for me. I'm imposter syndrome central. And my wife always knows when I'm in a second act of anything because I'm looking for like job boards for whatever. Oh, can I be a teacher here, or can I do this here? Because I'm convinced that this will be the one that they say, "Oh, you fool! You've gotten away with it for too long now."
Yeah, no, it's like that for me too. It took the longest time for me to really be like, no, you got this.
Yeah.
Like, and actually the moment it happened, I'm not gonna give the specifics because this was a really great thing, and then that person wound up leaving that comics thing shortly thereafter because it is constant musical chairs.
Right.
so I have no idea whether it'll ever happen, but she, turned to me at one point, she's like, could you do, and it was sort of thing A meets thing B.
Yeah.
And like my answer was literally like in my sleep. Because I was like, I know I can do that.
Yeah.
And that was such a weird feeling to me to be like, oh my gosh, it takes a while to learn to trust yourself.
Oh, most of my success is born of desperation. Like it's just like I say yes to everything, which is so stupid. But writing and being in a creative environment, it'll be like, this year was great, and the next 2 years, not so much. Like I got my first credit, and my next credit didn't come for like 4 years, and I was just a stay-at-home dad and ghostwriting and doing weird odd jobs on the side, and it was really hard. And then suddenly you get another job, and it kind of spirals as long as those relationships continue and people can trust you, and they like your work. I mean, you have to have good work, but you have to have work.
Yeah.
That's another thing. I know a lot of people that say they want to be writers. This was me very much when I started out in LA, and it's like, I want to be a writer. Oh yeah, what did you write? I was like, well, I got ideas. It's like, you just got to put them down. You just got to have it done.
I mean, I know very well it is super fun talking about being a writer.
Oh, it's the best part.
It is so much better than the writing most of the time.
It is.
It really, really is. And yeah, you're right, because it's sort of like, and this is true for any creative profession. My husband's a musician, I know other people too, but it's like either there are all the jobs or no jobs.
Yeah.
And so you take all the jobs when all the jobs come to you, because you have to, get ready for the next period where there are no jobs.
That's right. And they come. The periods without jobs do come.
Mm-hmm.
So marry a spouse that has a legit job.
You're giving me flashbacks on some things. I took on all those jobs that year. Yes. Well, I write books, but I'm also a tenured psychology professor, which is about the most stable job on earth. It's a nice position to be in. But that also meant it was a lot later before. I mean, I was in my 40s before my first book was out.
Yeah.
Whereas my son, he'd have been late 20s when he had his first book out, because he didn't have kids yet. But he also had a supportive spouse.
Yeah.
He was in graduate school, not enjoying it as much, and he had some possibilities in the writing. And his wife said, "Well, finish your master's at least, but instead of going out of the doctorate, why don't you take this opportunity?" So she was very supportive, and a nurse practitioner. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a spouse who can support, that's a nice one for folks to have.
Yeah, my
So
husband
find
and
that.
I versus health insurance.
Yeah.
Like that's the monster movie of our lives,
Sure.
basically.
Yeah, I married my girlfriend very quickly because I was like, I don't want her to understand how much of a schlub I am. And I think on our second date, I would not recommend this to anybody. I was like, I'm probably going to be poor the rest of my life, and she must have not heard it. But, oh well for her. But she is far more intelligent and smart. But there was a moment where I'm doing really well, and she actually got to leave her job, and it was wonderful. And then there was a time where I wasn't doing well, and it's like, you gotta go back and get a job, So being creative professionally is not for the faint of heart. And I also don't believe it's something that you can kind of half in, half out. I mean, I definitely was like, burn the ships. This is at this point the only thing I know to do, good or bad. I'm not qualified for anything else.
Oh yeah, if I ever have to go back to an office, I'm so screwed.
No, it's bad.
I left in 2009. They had to explain to me what a Slack was.
Oh yeah. It's terrible.
I mean, we were using fax machines.
Yeah.
All right, we got 15 minutes or so, and first word of my sentence.
Yeah, you do.
He can tell from the look on my
feel
face
like
and what the
question
audience
time.
questions. Oh, what do you got? Questions, comments, insults. Let's start with you.
No insults. I was gonna
Yeah.
ask. So working in comics, being a collaborative medium, like, how did you have to adjust to giving a script to an artist and then having them interpret that script into what's gonna end up on the page?
I know for me, it's not that different from animation. I actually was surprised at how very close it was, because in animation, there's a lot of directing on the page. That's not necessarily, like when I went into live action and I totally choreographed an entire fight scene in Supernatural, and Bob Singer's like, "Why did you do this?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I like it, and it's cool." And he's like, "We got people for that." Like, I'm like, "Okay." But in collaborating with the animation or artists on comic books, my feeling is they can use it or not use it. I can barely dress myself. So the fact that like an artist knows what he wants, and I'm just giving him a lot of information so that he can do it the way he wants. They sometimes analysis leads to paralysis. You know, they're like they're not sure. So you want to give them enough that they're excited about drawing it. But I've noticed for animation and comic books, it's very similar.
Yeah, I can't fully answer that because with the House of L series, we got an artist. She breaks her arm, which is terrible.
Why'd you do that to her?
I did not do it. I did not do it.
You draw what I say.
And then we get another artist, but then happier news, she got pregnant, but she had that morning sickness that's like all day, every day you have to be in an IV. So she's like, I can't work for several months. And so by the time Eric Zawadzki came on, it was like, we're about a graphic novel and a half ahead of you.
Oh, wow.
And so he had to take what I had given, and I had to really trust him. Now that said, he executed it really, really beautifully. I am not a person with a really strong visual imagination. Like people are like, "Do you draw your own comics?" I'm like, "The Adventures of the Stick People."
Yeah.
It's like that. So if the artist has a better way that they want to present something, then I'm 100% happy with that, and that's probably the attitude I will have going forward.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've taught to, I just think a few weeks ago, I guess it was in Austin, I had some comic book artists with me, and they're talking about that kind of thing, that trust between writer and artist, and the relationship, and degree of detail, like the fight scenes, where you get one treatment says, okay, pages 4 through 9, they fight.
Yeah.
That's what the treatment says.
Yeah.
And then there'll be the other extreme where the artist has to point out, you've described 5 actions in this one panel.
Uh-huh.
We can't do that. I'm going with the one that best conveys the sense of where we need to wind up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Someone else, right here.
This is kind of a boring technical question, but what kind of software would you guys prefer to use for your storyboarding, your organization? Like, are you straight up Word docs, Google, Scrivener? What do you guys like?
I mean, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, the Hollywood standard is Final Draft, and everybody has a very big love-hate relationship with it. So I do use Final Draft. I use Word for comic books, but Final Draft for screenwriting. But I am also one of those people that I will try to find. I will do a Save the Cat beat sheet on this one time, or then I'll get index cards out this time, and just to try to trick myself into thinking about it differently. And I'll do that all the time and stuff.
Yeah, I've actually been playing with process and tools the last few years, and miraculously, like the editing thing, I actually really made that process better. I'm still psyched about it. I was like, oh, all right. I draft in Scrivener. Once I get it into one document, it moves over to Word, and then I stick with that. But I love the 2-screen thing because I am an outliner on Scrivener. That's super handy. And I appreciate it a lot, but once it goes to a publisher, it's going to need to be in Word, and I work with it in Word thereafter. That said, another of the things I started doing the last few years, I am going to bet I'm not the only person in this room who, when you're in a bookstore and you're getting your books and everything, but then there's a beautiful blank notebook, and you're like, I need another. Even though there's like this, like one of the pillars of your house is now these notebooks. When it was like, all right, I'm going to start using these notebooks, and I use them for brainstorming, just coming up with stuff. Or a thing I've started doing is before I sit down for the day, I get in the notebook and I just write a page or two about what I'm not drafting. I'm just like, what do I want this to be? Like, what elements should I be thinking about? What's the feeling that I want for this? And I have found that is so clarifying, letting me kind of think through it in a very loose way before I start trying to put the words down. So all of those have been super effective.
That was the question of somebody who wants to write. How many of you want to write? Yeah, I figured that for a topic like this, that would be a whole lot of folks in the room. Thank you, the rest of you, for joining us as well. All right, you got one here in the middle?
Yeah, I'm currently kind of writing a story with some friends. How can we get our idea out there as a proof of concept while also kind of protecting our work? How can we do that?
I mean, this is tricky, but copyright is a far more flexible thing than you think.
Yeah.
It can cover many, many things.
I mean, if you have something that you've done and you put it out there, it's yours. Especially if you publish it online. As long as you can,
Prove that.
Yeah, prove that. There's always kind of the flim-flam thing, like when I first started doing screenplays, oh, you register it with the WGA, but I've come to just realize that was a money-grabbing scheme. We'll protect it for 3 years. It's like, oh, okay, you're no help. But yeah, I would be less concerned about protecting it and more concerned about doing it. And that is always going to be the battle with a writer, is getting it done. Alan Burnett downstairs, genius, legend, he'd always say done is better than perfect, like all the time. And it's so true. You have to be done. You have to say the end. I'm a firm believer in writing as fast as humanly possible because the blank page is the enemy and it will cripple me. So I will do that and then I'll go edit. And edit's so much more fun and easy for me as long as I can get some stuff done.
Yeah, and with certain very, very, very rare and specific cases, people worry too much about an idea getting stolen because ideas are not the thing. Execution is the thing. More than once, and I bet you've had this too. Somebody comes up to you, they're like, I've got an idea for a book. How about I tell you and you write it and we split it 50-50? And you're like, that is not a 50-50 split. That's not a good deal.
I had that happen yesterday.
Yeah. Your execution of the idea is going to be what matters. Like the only time I've personally ever tripped on something was I was so proud of this idea that was cooking up my head, and this was many years ago, as you realize, about dream architects. And then it was like, Inception, and I was like, okay, now that's a little on the nose. I'm gonna have to go work with that. But that is very, very much the exception and not the rule.
I've had that happen a great deal where you have great ideas, you've even written some of them, and you go to a movie theater and that green preview screen comes up and within 2 seconds you're like, oh no. Like all the work is gone. Ideas come and go. I mean, you can't be precious with it. You gotta and I know people that get stuck and paralyzed, this is my idea. And the other thing is don't ever approach a creator and say, I've got this idea. I mean, legally, it's such a minefield for us.
Oh yeah, people want to send me their Star Wars fiction. I'm like, I am contractually not allowed to look at it. If you happened to bring up some plot point that even somebody I don't even know about is putting in a comic, that person could conceivably sue.
Yeah, Star Trek used to accept open submissions for a long time, and they had to call a halt to that because of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean it happens on Twitter often, and it sucks because I understand the argument. It's the paradox of I want to be a writer and break in. How do you do that? Well, we write something good and have somebody notice it, but how do I do that if I can't send it? It's like, I know. It's terrible. To get an agent, it was always that way. It's like, oh, I'm a great writer, you should read me. And they're like, I won't take unsolicited scripts. And you're like, but how do I get you to see it? And they're just like, nah. So there's a certain amount of like networking, and I know conferences. A big part for me is making sure that the person that's talking to me is not crazy. And like, I know that sounds funny, but it's true. And when you go to some place like LA and you're networking, there's a lot of opportunity and open doors. And this is a time in which creators and editors and agents are the most accessible they've ever been. So,
it also depends because now you see agents put out there, they're like, I'm specifically looking for these kinds of things. So if you're searching around, like, I think it's Query Tracker is a big one for that. Like, you can find who's out there who's taking submissions or will be looking at people from a certain conference, and you can know the thing that I have is something that is at least going to get them to open that file.
But I'm sure that you have to sign something before they open that file.
Honestly, with original novels, less so, because even more, it's execution is everything. Idea is very little. It's very, very little.
It's crazy. I mean, the legal loopholes are the.
There's a website, Agent Query, which is it looks like it's from the 90s, the way it's set up. It's a very good source, information on agents. They say what kind of thing. It's how I got my agent. Was information through them, and it's a very valuable resource on finding people who are looking for different kinds of topics. I found somebody who was representing 2 areas that were in my book, plus an area that I want to do sometime, and I created a number of people, but it was a very great resource, and just in terms of the ideas.
Well, and understand too, if you get an agent that doesn't, most people I know that get agents fire them very soon, and they are upset about having a manager, and you're paying money to people. You still have to work. I mean, most of the work I had never had a manager up until like 2 years ago, and I got one, and then it was like, oh, here's a bunch of meetings, but it never brought me any work. I still was making, all the work I was getting was from my own personal experience and the people I knew. So there's a lot of people that put all their chips into finding an agent. That's what's going to do it. And it's still about getting work and making work and having a varied catalog of things that you can hand out. I mean, I can't tell you how many times like, oh, do you have a horror movie? It's like, yes, I do. Do you have a martial art movie? Yes, I do. You having a bunch of different things that you can show people shows that, oh, they're serious about this and that they've done it. And
that's less of a thing with print.
I imagine. It's a much bigger.
It is. Well, I mean, with print, honestly, the challenge is almost the opposite thing, because I got a new agent in 2020, and I was going out. It's like, so I need somebody who can handle both, like comics for DC,
right,
Star Wars books, my Jane Austen mystery series, and other things that I would like to do. And wonderfully, I did find an agent who was experienced in most of those areas and was willing to learn in the areas that she wasn't. And she's been great, but it's not the same thing about meetings, whatever. It really is in print, like get the book in front of the right publisher, the right editor. And the agents know better than other people who those editors are and what they're looking for and what personalities are going to mesh with material. So, I mean, self-publication is definitely a thing now, and in some genres it can be quite profitable, less so some others. I had a friend who tried to publish a literary novel, self-publish, and it's like, no, those live or die by reviews, and review publications can't take self-published books because they drown in manuscripts immediately. But like romance and sci-fi, like those can go very well. But even in those cases, like, you're going to want to find an editor to help you. Don't ever be with the like, oh, the editor will change all my precious words, in a power struggle just to dominate me and make me write this book I didn't want to write. No, a good editor is there to help you.
That's what she said.
Is it one they can do quickly?
I think so.
Okay.
So I'm significantly into a sci-fi novel that I'm writing, and I'm at the climax, and I'm struggling with the confidence thing of like suspension of disbelief. What is a grounding tactic that you can like use to really bring the readers along with you?
Oh gosh, nothing I write.
I mean, it's tricky because I don't know exactly what you're referring to. And I can think of things that have done something at the last minute and completely lost me. And I can also think of things, that movie Tokyo Godfathers I was telling you about, that has all of a sudden at the end this one thing that is almost supernatural in what has been an incredibly realistic movie to that point, especially for an animated movie. And all of a sudden does this thing, but it's beautiful. And it's almost like, the spark of the divine, this moment. I guess you have to be able to step back far enough to be like, if I were reading this, would I feel like, oh, I've been wonderfully surprised, or, oh, this is like, who's seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? everybody.
If you haven't, leave.
Yes. You know, is this Ralph the Wonder Llama?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, where the credits suddenly is like, sometimes when I'm writing on deadline, the last couple of chapters have a real Ralph the Wonder Llama quality. But that is also exactly where a good beta reader or editor comes in most handy, because you will only ever know what your story looks like from the inside out.
Right.
You have to have somebody who looks at it the way a viewer will, you know, without understanding all of that, and get their take. It's really valuable.
And by the way, I mean, get done
Yeah.
and set it aside. And just set it aside for a while, and something's bumping for you, and then you can come back to it. But also, you know, did you read any Stephen King novel when he was high on cocaine? It's like the last third
Oh
of
my
the book
gosh.
never made any sense.
Yeah.
But I didn't care. I'm reading it, and there's a turtle and a spider. I'm like, well, you know, this is great. You know,
His character's at a party for a 30-page rant.
I know.
In that book.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you know,
Or you have that one book, I think it's Salem's Lot, where the three main male characters are named Mike, Mark, and Matt. Never do this.
but
That's
if it's
before the
bumping,
cocaine.
I would say the best thing you could possibly do is finish it best you can,
Okay.
set it aside, and then come back to it. Usually those answers come to me like I'm in the shower, I'm doing something else, I'm working on something else, and there's just a nagging thing that will go, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah, it is absolutely terrible that, in fact, the correct thing to do sometimes is to sit around watching stupid TV
Yeah.
shows
Yeah.
and then come back 3 hours later and you're like, I don't know why I know how the scene ends now,
Yeah.
and yet I do.
Yeah.
So you're just watching TV? No, this is important
Oh, I tell
decompression
you.
time.
Market research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would come home and my wife would be like, I had such a hard day, and blah, blah, blah. And what about you? I'd be like, I talked about Batman for 3 hours, I'm so tired. It's like, just be careful who you talk to about it. You know?
Yeah.
All right, if you have other questions or comments for them, where can they find you, here or online?
Downstairs in Artist Alley, we're right next to each other, or spacekicker.com is my website.
I have ClaudiaGray.com, Gray with an A, but that has links to social media. I personally don't do most of the social media anymore. I do Instagram because I like to look at interior design, and I do Tumblr because all 14 of us left are having a nice time. But you can come down and talk with me at Artist Alley. We're both going to be there till about 4 today, and then we have to fly home. But very happy to talk with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.